Have you ever wondered what humanity believed before the gods of Olympus had names? Before Thor raised his hammer? Before myth was divided into East and West? Tonight, we journey back to one of the world's oldest and most influential spiritual traditions, Zoroastrian mythology. What did people believe long before Greek or Norse myths took shape? Who was Ahura Mazda, the Lord of Wisdom? And how did the ancient Persians understand the eternal tension between light and darkness that governs the universe itself? In this story, we'll explore the Zoroastrian vision of creation, the cosmic struggle between good and evil, the sacred role of fire, and the life and teachings of the prophet Zoroaster, whose ideas quietly reshaped spiritual thought thousands of years ago. Beliefs born in ancient Persia helped form later ideas of heaven and hell, angels and demons, and the enduring conflict between order and chaos, ideas that still echo through religions and cultures around the world today. As always, I'd love to know where in the world you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. Whether you're lying down to rest, drifting towards sleep, or simply curious about ancient beliefs, I'm truly glad you're here. Now, let us begin.
Zoroastrian myth begins in a place that feels like a courtroom lit by an unblinking lamp. It is a story where existence is argued into shape, where the first drama is a moral one, and where the earliest sound you can imagine is not thunder, but a choice. Ahura Mazda, the wise lord, stands at the beginning as the one who knows. In the oldest layers of the tradition, he is not merely powerful, he is aware in a way no other being can match. Knowledge is his weapon and his atmosphere. He is the source of Asha, the right order of things, truth that is not just honesty, but the straight grain of reality itself. To live according to Asha is to live in tune with the universe as Ahura Mazda intended it, and to break it is not simply to sin, but to warp the world. This is the first lesson the mythology teaches, that the universe is ethical before it is physical, and the physical world is a battlefield built from the bones of that ethic. Later priests and storytellers would explain it in careful systems, in measured spans of cosmic time, in lists of creations and their guardians. But the feeling behind those systems is older and sharper. The world is not neutral, the world is claimed. Opposing Ahura Mazda is Angramanu, the destructive spirit, the one who chooses the lie. In later writings, he becomes Ahriman, the name that tastes like grit. But even when the naming shifts, the core remains. This is not a rival god in a polite pantheon. This is refusal made into a person. The lie in this tradition is not a simple false statement. It is a mode of existence that corrodes everything it touches. It does not create, it infects. It mocks the pattern. It takes the clean geometry of Asha and tries to make it crooked, because crookedness is the only victory it understands. Some texts speak of the two spirits as twins, not twins of affection, but twins of proximity, like two thoughts rising from the same mind and going to war. Others are careful to protect Ahura Mazda's singular supremacy, insisting that evil is a choice that can never match the depth of wisdom. But the mythic truth, the one that makes the hairs lift on the back of the neck, is that evil is not a mistake, it is a decision. And from that decision, the rest of history follows. In the telling preserved in later Middle Persian works like the Bundashin, Ahura Mazda first creates spiritually in a state that is luminous and untouchable, a blueprint of what will later become matter. It is not unlike a master builder imagining a city before the first stone is set. In that first phase, creation is safe because it is not yet exposed. Angramanu exists in a kind of darkness and ignorance, a blind realm of not knowing. And when he becomes aware of the brilliance of Ahura Mazda's creation, he does what a thing of spite always does.
he lunges. The myth insists that the first attack is not aimed at land or water, because those do not exist yet as we know them. The first attack is aimed at the idea of order itself. It is an assault on the plan. In response, Ahura Mazda chooses something that looks strange to modern eyes, but makes perfect sense within the myth's moral physics. He does not try to erase evil with a snap. He sets a limit. He establishes time. Time in Zoroastrian myth is not only a background, it is a strategy. The tradition describes a cosmic span of 12,000 years divided into epochs, a long measured corridor in which good and evil will mix, struggle, and finally separate. You can feel the grim confidence in it, the tone of a judge who has already written the sentence and is now allowing the criminal to run just long enough to prove the verdict. Ahura Mazda knows the end from the beginning, and that knowledge does not make the war less real. It makes it more terrifying because it means every act of cruelty, every sickness, every betrayal, every lie whispered into a human ear is permitted to happen within the span of time that will ultimately destroy it. This is not a gentle universe. It is a universe that will allow darkness to show its full face so that it can be condemned without argument. With time established, creation becomes material. The world is built in an order that feels like ritual. First, the sky, hard and shining like a stone dome, sometimes described as metal, sometimes as crystal, a fortress roof meant to keep out intrusion. Then water, and then earth, and then plants, and then animals, and finally, the human being. There is a stern beauty to the sequence, like a ceremony performed without ornament, because ornament would only distract from the seriousness of what is being done. Each creation is not only a thing, but a responsibility, and each has a spiritual guardian, a protective force aligned with Ahura Mazda's will. This is where the great beings called the Amisha Spenters begin to loom behind the scenes, not as distant gods with petty desires, but as immortal aspects of divine reality. Truth, good mind, rightful dominion, wholeness, immortality, devotion. Each concept given weight and presence. The mythology loves these pairings, the way abstract virtue becomes a character, and character becomes a force that shapes the soil under your feet. Then come the first living exemplars of the created world, the ones that feel like anchors in a sea of symbol. There is Gaumad, the primordial man, radiant and immense in the oldest descriptions. And there is the primordial bovine, the first animal, often called the uniquely created bull. They are not quaint, they are the first targets. Angramanu's hatred is not philosophical, it is predatory. To wound creation, he must wound what is most alive in it. So the myth describes an invasion of demons, the Davas, who are not merely alternative gods, but the twisted powers of chaos and deception. They bring disease, decay, fever, and the first taste of death. The assault is a kind of contamination. The lie does not march like an army with banners. It seeps, it bites, it ruins from within. Gaumad is struck down, and the primordial bull is killed. If you're expecting a creation story that avoids ugliness, this is where Zoroastrian myth turns its face toward you and does not blink. Death is not an afterthought. Death is introduced as a weapon. Yet the myth does something startling with that weapon. It refuses to grant it finality. The death of the bull becomes the source of new life. From the bull's seed, purified and carried under divine protection, come the species of animals, the multiplication of living forms that will fill the world. From the bull's body, plants arise, healing herbs and grasses, the first green defiance against decay. It is as if Ahura Mazda
takes Angra cruelty and forces it into service, turning the wound into an engine of abundance. The tradition returns to this theme again and again. Evil can strike, evil can spoil, but evil cannot create. Every time it tries to destroy, it inadvertently supplies the raw material for good to grow stronger. From Galamad's death comes another transformation. In some accounts, the metals of the earth are said to have emerged from his body, the hidden bones of the world, as if humanity's first ancestor becomes the very substance of tools and weapons and rings, the hard things that can be shaped and used. More crucially, from his seed, preserved and cleansed, spring the first human couple, Masha and Mashyan. They do not arrive as glittering nobles, they rise like plants from the ground, a detail that makes the story feel ancient in a way you can almost touch. Human beings in this myth are not dropped from heaven fully formed. They are grown. They are part of the earth but not trapped by it. They carry within them the capacity to choose, and that capacity is the point. The earliest moment of humanity is portrayed as vulnerable and uncertain, because to have choice is to have risk. In later retellings, the first couple lives simply, almost innocently, learning the world as a child learns the edge of a knife by touching it. They are given guidance. They are meant to align themselves with a Shah, to praise Ahura Mazda, to recognize the source of what sustains them.
For a time they do. Then the lie approaches, not always as a monster, but as a whisper, an insinuation that gratitude is foolish, that the world is theirs by right, that they owe nothing. This is one of the most important moves in Zoroastrian myth because it brings the cosmic war down to the scale of a human mouth forming words. The first great battlefield is not a plain of fire, it is speech, it is thought. Good thoughts, good words, good deeds are not slogans in this tradition, they are military doctrine, because the destructive spirit fights first by corrupting the mind. This is also where the sacred elements begin to take on the heavy charge they will carry through centuries of ritual. Fire in Zoroastrian life becomes more than warmth or light. It is a visible sign of Asha, a living emblem of clarity. That does not mean the religion worships fire as a god, but it treats fire as a witness, as something that reveals what is clean and what is not. Water, too, is revered, not in a sentimental way, but as a sacred substance that must not be polluted, because pollution is a kind of alliance with the lie. The story of creation, with its careful sequence and its immediate contamination, becomes the foundation for a whole way of living. When later Zoroastrians build fire temples and tend flames with obsessive care, they are not being quaint, they are reenacting the creation story. They are insisting, day after day, that there is still a bright order worth preserving in a world that constantly tries to rot. The mythic chronicle, when told as a story rather than a set of doctrines, feels like watching a kingdom being founded while an enemy already tunnels under the walls. Ahura Mazda's creation is not an untouched paradise, it is a constructed stronghold. The sky is a rampart, the waters are a moat, the earth is a field meant to be cultivated and defended. And within this fortress, humans appear not as ornaments, but as soldiers with untrained hands. They are weak compared to the great spirits, but they have something the demons cannot stand. They have the ability to choose alignment. They can accept truth, they can refuse it, and because they can refuse it, their acceptance means something. In a universe where everything is a moral contest, freedom is the most dangerous gift. In the background of these earliest events, you can sense other figures waiting to become prominent. The Azartas, the worthy ones, divine helpers who will later become familiar names, guardians of contracts, waters, dawns, and victories. But at the beginning, the stage is set with simpler, harsher pieces. Wisdom and destruction, truth and lie, light and a darkness that is not merely absence, but intention. The story does not pretend that the world begins clean and stays clean. It begins clean and is immediately challenged. and that challenge becomes the engine of time. The human race rises out of a death wound and learns to speak in a world where every word matters. Even the landscape of these myths feels shaped by that tension. When Zoroastrian texts and later storytellers speak of the first river, the first mountain, the first plants, they often do so with the sense that these are not neutral features, but parts of a plan to resist decay. The mountains are bones that hold the earth in place. The plants are medicine against demon-sent sickness. The animals are companions in the struggle, living beings that must be treated with a kind of moral respect because they too belong to the good creation. When the tradition condemns wanton slaughter or needless pollution, it is not being delicate, it is describing treason. To damage creation is to assist Angramanu in his one true talent, the talent of ruining.
And in the first chapter of this chronicle, the great turning point is not a battle won or lost. It is the moment the world becomes mixed. The pristine spiritual creation is gone. Matter exists, and with matter comes vulnerability. Demons can crawl. Disease can bite. Hunger can press its hard thumb into the belly. But also within matter, within this compromised world, good can be chosen repeatedly. Asha can be practiced. A human can think a clean thought in the middle of filth. That is the wager at the heart of the mythology. Ahura Mazda allows the assault not because he doubts himself, but because the final victory must be something more than mere domination. It must be vindication. It must prove that truth is not only stronger, but chosen. In the stories that priests whispered over glowing coals when the world still felt young, there was a time when men did not die and cattle did not fall sick, when the earth did not crack with drought and children did not come into the world only to be carried out too soon. The name that stands over that bright interval is Yima, whom later tongues would call Jamshid, but in the oldest Avesta is simply Yima the Splendid, Yima the Good Shepherd. Before he was a legend, he was a choice. Ahura Mazda looked upon the world he had raised from spirit into matter, knew that the destructive spirit would not relent, and understood that creation needed a caretaker within time, a mortal ruler who would stand between demons and flocks, who would guard the pattern of Asha, not with abstractions alone, but with laws and decisions and the sharp edge of authority. So the wise Lord spoke, and in the stories, the sound of that speech is like white fire through a still sky. In the day of that first meeting, Mazda did not merely offer a crown.
He offered a mantle that was heavier than any crown, the role of prophet. In one of the oldest remembered episodes, Ahura Mazda comes to Yima and asks him to receive the revelation, the word that would later be given to Zarathustra. He asks Yima to be the one who proclaims to mankind who made the world, who set truth as the law of things. And Yima, who was called Shining and Beautiful and Lord of Flocks, does something that marks him forever. He refuses, not because he loves the lie, but because his nature is different. He tells Ahura Mazda that he is not fit to carry the burden of teaching the religion, that he would rather tend than preach, rule than prophesy. It is a refusal, and it is also a confession. He is not made of the same metal as the later seer, who will walk into the fire of vision and not look away. Yima is of the earth. Mazdian tradition does not condemn him for this. Instead, Ahura Mazda accepts and reshapes the offer. If you cannot be my messenger, he says, then be my steward. Guard my creation. Enlarge my world. From that moment, the myth turns into something that feels almost like a tale of engineers and kings rather than winged spirits. Yima becomes not only a ruler, but an architect of lived space. Under his reign, the earth enters its golden age. The beasts multiply. The first farms flourish. People do not age into dust as quickly as they will later. The shadow of Ahura Mazda lies further out at the horizon, pacing but not yet permitted to strike. The Gothic verses that remember him say that he was the first mortal with whom Ahura Mazda conversed, and that he was entrusted with the herds, the lands, the people, the living things to keep them thriving and unharmed. Yima is described as the Good Shepherd, not as a gentle metaphor, but as a precise job description.
He is meant to guard, to increase, to lead his charges to pasture and away from harm. The myth does not leave this fertility as a vague glow. It counts. It tells us that under Yima, the world grew so full that there was no more room. Century after century passes in the telling, and the first land, as Ahura Mazda had formed it, begins to strain. Every field is sown, every valley holds its herds. There is a moment where joy turns quietly into pressure, where abundance threatens to become crowding. In the Vendidad, that old law text that is also a book of myths, Ahura Mazda comes to Yima again and tells him plainly that the earth can no longer contain all the cattle, all the men, all the wild creatures that have grown up in this peaceful age. Under another ruler, this might have meant war to thin the numbers, famine to push back the swelling line of mouths. Under Mazda's stewardship, it means something else. It means expansion. Ahura Mazda gives Yima a strange command. He tells him to press the earth and make it larger. To perform this act of world stretching, he puts into Yima's hand two royal implements that will echo through later tales: a golden ring and a wrought staff or sword that gleams with the authority of heaven. These are not only ornaments, they are the signs of Kavarina, the royal glory, that radiant grace which in Iranian myth clings to rightful kings like a mantle of unseen fire. With ring and staff in hand, Yima steps forth to enlarge the world. He does it 3 times. The text says that each time he pressed the earth with the flat of his foot and the metal of his authority, he made it larger by 1/3, so that it could hold thousands and thousands more living beings. You can picture this not as a polite metaphor, but as something vivid and uncanny. The soil groans, the horizon pulls back, rivers thread wider courses, valleys open like new lungs. It is as if the king has taken the map of creation and stretched it on a frame. Between each enlargement, centuries pass, and the myths are clear that there is no sickness in this age. No one grows old. There is no war worth the name. The Davas have not yet found a way in to spoil the long spring. Yima is successful at his appointed task, so successful that later poets love to place his name on shining thrones and halls of plenty. The court of Jamshid in later Persian epics, with its cups of seeing and its feasts, is the blurred memory of this first Yima, the steward of an unspoiled world. But the older Zoroastrian telling is cooler in tone. It stresses not decadence, but careful order. The king makes the world larger. He keeps the flocks. He makes certain that there is always enough grass for the cow and always enough grain for the woman grinding at her stone. In that rhythm of management, you can feel why Ahura Mazda chose a shepherd king rather than a seer. Prophets speak to the future. Shepherds keep the present from collapsing. Yet, even in this golden span, time continues to move. The cosmic 12,000-year plan does not pause simply because men are breathing easy. The tradition says that at a certain point, Ahura Mazda looks ahead and sees what is coming. Angram, I knew, humiliated in the first collision at creation, has not forgotten the taste of living things. His demons lurk at the edges of the world, unable yet to swallow it, but learning. And so Mazda foresees a catastrophe that will break the ease of Yima's reign. A winter unlike any common year, a deadly freezing that will sweep over the earth and kill flocks and men and crops in a scything silence. This is not a natural cycle.
This is an attack. It is the destructive spirit trying a more subtle tactic. Not open war, but climate twisted into a weapon. Ahura Mazda goes to Yima a third time and warns him. The wording in the old story is almost intimate. The wise lord describes snow that will fall deep as the tallest man, wolves made bold by hunger, rivers that will stop in their beds. He tells Yima that this is coming because Angrao Mainyu desires to wipe out the creatures of the good creation. The shepherd king, who has spent long centuries arranging room and food and safety, is now given a darker task. He must preserve a remnant. He must build a refuge that can outlast the assault. The solution Ahura Mazda gives him is one of the most remarkable images in Zoroastrian myth, a symbol so vivid that later ages could not resist weaving it into their own tales of flood and refuge, their own visions of chosen survivors and closed doors. Mazda instructs Yima to build a vara. The vara is not an ark on the sea. It is a world within the world. The telling has the tone almost of a blueprint. Yima is to hollow out a space in the earth, a vast enclosure under the protection of mountains, roofed and walled against the killing cold, with its own light source that is not the ordinary sun. The size is described in terms of riding grounds and measures that would have meant something concrete to people for whom distance was paced on foot and on horseback. Within this great enclosure, Yima is to arrange everything needed for life: seeds of every useful plant, pairs and groups of every kind of animal worth preserving, craftsmen and women of every skill. The pattern is familiar in a way that sends a shiver down the spine. A chosen number of the best of each species will outlast the ruin. Outside, winter will stalk and close its teeth on whatever it can reach. Inside, life will continue in a suspended spring. The myth lingers over the selection.
Yima does not simply admit anyone who knocks. He is commanded to choose the most excellent, the least stained, the animals without blemish, the people who are strongest in body, clearest in mind, and most aligned with Asha. The idea that the future will be seeded from the best rather than the average is an uncomfortable one, and yet, in the context of this myth, it fits the hard utilitarian tone that runs beneath its spiritual surface. This is a universe at war. A refuge is not a charity. It is a strategic reserve. Within the Vira, Yima is also instructed to arrange the spaces carefully. Fields for planting beneath the roof, paddocks for animals, channels for water brought in from pure springs, a central fire or many fires to be kept burning constantly so that the spirit of Asha is never driven out by the dark. The description makes the Vira feel less like a cave and more like a hidden kingdom, a secret city that will sleep through the cataclysm. The most uncanny detail in the ancient account is the matter of light. The Vira is not lit by ordinary sky. Some versions speak of a star-like radiance, some of a supernaturally bright window, some of plants and metals that shine on their own. The point is that Yima's refuge does not need the sun that Angramanu plans to smother with clouds and storms. It has its own inward illumination, a pale echo of the original spiritual creation preserved here in miniature while the material world is battered. In a way, Ahura Mazda is taking the first phase of creation, the purely spiritual light, and tucking it away under the mountains while the mixed material world above undergoes its trial. That is the logic of the myth. In the Vira, a piece of uncontaminated reality survives. Yima obeys. This matters. Up to this point, he has refused to be a prophet, but he has never disobeyed a command about stewardship. He gathers the chosen,
perhaps under the guise of a great festival, so that panic does not break the order of things. He brings in the seeds and the animals, the artisans and the singers, the priests of fire and the guardians of water. In some later imaginings, the Vara is reached by a deeply hidden entrance, a narrow passage that must be sealed with stone. The moment when the last entry is closed has the feel of a door slamming on an era. Outside, the wind begins to rise. Inside, the air is still and faintly warm, carrying the smell of earth and animals and burning wood. The people who follow Yema into this underworld paradise are not only saved, they are cut off. The Vara is a mercy, and it is also a tomb for a world that is about to cease. The Zoroastrian tradition does not tell this part as a gentle metaphor. It does not flinch from the idea that outside the Vara, countless beings perish. That is the nature of mythic catastrophe. It clears the field so that a new phase of history can emerge. But inside, time moves differently. Some accounts suggest that life in the Vara runs at a slower pace, that age does not touch the chosen as harshly, that children born there will carry forward not only the blood of the first races, but a certain refinement, a stamina against future assaults. The Vara becomes both chrysalis and archive. It holds within it the knowledge of farming, of metalwork, of worship, of law. All the things Yema has learned while tending the Golden Age, packed into the minds and tools of the few, so that they can be taken out again when the storm has passed. There are whispers in later retellings that the Vara is not merely a one-time structure. Some mystic writers speak of hidden kingdoms where the righteous will gather again before the final renovation of the world. Secret places where the faithful live apart from the corruptions of the last days.
These may be spiritual inheritors of Yema's refuge. But in the original myth, what matters is that Ahura Mazda and his mortal steward outwit the destructive spirit. The enemy can twist the weather, but he cannot reach into the sanctuary that was built with wisdom and obedience. While the earth above groans under ice and famine, while the destructive winter does its worst, inside the Vara, the rhythm of good thoughts, good words, good deeds continues. Fires are fed, prayers are chanted. Children learn the stories of creation and of Gaamad and of the first couple, and now also of Yema, the king who made the world bigger, and then built a world within the world to keep it from vanishing. There is a shadow as well in the figure of Yema, a hint of the fall that will later overtake him. The very texts that praise his early reign also recall that he eventually strays, that pride slips in where humility once stood, that he begins to claim for himself what should belong only to the wise Lord. They speak of the royal glory, the Karana, leaving him like a great bird that can no longer tolerate the smell of arrogance. That moment belongs to a later part of the chronicle, when the Golden Age has hardened into something brittle. For now, in this chapter of the story, he remains the exemplar of a mortal king who did what he was asked. He enlarged the earth. He sheltered the seed of life. He listened when the voice of wisdom warned him of a storm no one else could see. In the stillness of the Vara, with its enclosed fields and its starless sky, with the muffled sound of people moving about doing ordinary tasks in an extraordinary refuge, Yema has fulfilled the task he chose when he turned away from prophecy and accepted stewardship instead. He has bought time for creation with his obedience. Outside, the winter gathers, a white silence sharpened by the malice of Angra Mayu.
Inside, under the guarded lights, new generations are preparing to inherit a world that will no longer be innocent, but will still be worth saving. If you could stand outside the dome of the sky and look down on the world the way the gods are said to look, you would not see a blank heaven or an empty blue lid over the earth. You would see a court. Not a court of lounging deities squabbling over wine and petty insults, but a severe and luminous council, a circle of presences that are at once thoughts in the mind of Ahura Mazda and persons in their own right. The ancient priests like to say that the wise lord was alone and yet surrounded, singular and yet attended by his own qualities given shape. In their words, the high god did not sit with a family in the way of other pantheons. He sat with his virtues. His closest companions were not flesh, but principles that burned as brightly as any star. And those principles were the Amasha Spenta, the bounteous immortals, the 7 great beings that turned the wheels of the cosmos. The stories make it clear that these immortals are not lesser gods in a noisy assembly. They are more like the pillars of a great hall. You cannot remove one without bringing down part of the building. At their head stands Ahura Mazda himself, counted as the first in the 7. The others are Asha Vahishta, the best truth, the embodiment of cosmic order and holy fire. Vumala, the good mind or good purpose, the kindly intelligence that guides right thought and care for cattle and all living creatures. Kashatra Vaya, the desirable dominion, the power of just rule and the strength of metal and sky. Spenta Armeti, the holy devotion, who is the patience and faithfulness of the earth herself. Haulwatat, wholeness and health, guardian of water and completion. Ameritat, immortality, whose charge is the world of plants and the promise that life will not finally be extinguished. Each of these names is a concept, a character, and a field of responsibility. To invoke one is to stir a whole corner of reality. In the layered storytelling of later texts, these Amesha Spent radiate out from Ahura Mazda like the arms of a star. Asha Vahishta keeps the pattern of things straight. When a priest kindles the ritual fire, when the flame leaps up clear and without smoke, that clarity is his work. That fire is not only heat, it is order made visible. Vo Mana stands behind every act of kindness to animals, every decision to care for a herd rather than abuse it, because in this tradition, cattle are not only wealth, they are a trust from the Creator. Kashashatraya is heard in the ring of the hammer and seen in the firm line of a city wall. He is the strength of a ruler who refuses to oppress and chooses to protect. Spent Armiti is felt as the strange peace that comes to those who plant and tend the soil with reverence, the quiet sense that the ground itself can be a friend if treated with humility. Horvat ripples in rivers and wells, and Amaretat breathes in every green shoot that breaks the crust of the earth. The myth makes the point that goodness is not a vague cloud. It is structured. It has departments, if you like, and each department is an immortal. The order is sharpened by opposition. For every Amisha Spent there is a Druge, a demon or principle of the lie, twisting what the immortal sustains. Asha Vahishta is opposed by the demon of the burning stench, the fire that devours without purity, the smoke that blinds rather than illuminates. Vo Mana is opposed by bad mind, the whisper that turns care for creatures into cruelty and greed. Kashashatraya stands against tyrannical force, against the demon that takes metal and turns it into instruments of pointless torture. Spent Armiti faces indifference and contempt, the attitudes that lead people to foul the earth and treat land as carrion.
Hawatat stands against starving thirst, Amoret against withering famine. The ancient writers do not always give each pair a neat name, but they insist on the structure. Every virtue has a corrupt mirror, and every act of corruption feeds that mirror shape. When a person lies, when they pollute, when they betray a trust, they are not just misbehaving, they are nourishing the wrong side of the council. The cosmic architecture mirrors this moral architecture. The universe is layered.
there is the material world, the Getig, where men live and bleed and bury their dead. Above it stretch the regions of sky, which themselves have stations and levels. Beyond the star field, there is the realm of endless light, where Ahura Mazda dwells. But between Earth and that unreachable height, there are places where the Asha Spenta and their allies hold watch. The stars are not mere pinpoints, but camps of the righteous. Fire flares on Earth in hearths and temples as the sign of Asha. Water runs in rivers under the eye of Hawatat. Beyond the seven immortals stands a wider host, the Yazatars, literally the worthy ones, divine beings who are venerated but not quite on the same fundamental tier as the Asha Spenta. They are like captains and marshals under the immortal generals, each with their own portfolios. Among them, one name towers above the rest in the stories of justice and dawn: Mithra, or Mia, the Lord of Covenants. Mithra strides through the texts as a tireless guardian of contracts and oaths. He is described as possessing 1,000 ears and 10,000 eyes because no agreement escapes his attention. When two men shake hands at sunrise and pledge loyalty, Mithra rides across the horizon in his chariot with his eyes on their fingers. If either of them later breaks that oath, Mithra is the one who bears witness and demands payment. Later empires borrowed and reshaped this figure until Mithra became a distant god of soldiers and secret rites.
But in the older Iranian vision, he is a stern and blazing patron of honesty. Another great Yazata is Srasha, the personification of obedience and divine hearing, whose name is sometimes translated as attentive listening. If Mithra is the enforcer of human promises, Srasha is the guardian of the bond between human and divine. He listens when a man or woman recites the sacred words at dawn. He is said to be armed and sleepless, patrolling the world and striking down the demons that try to invade the hour of prayer. The law places him on the Chinvat Bridge after death, that narrow crossing where souls are weighed. There he stands with scales and blade, attending as Rushnu, the judge, measures the deeds of the departed. Together, they form part of the border guard between the world of the living and the blessed realm of the righteous. The council is not only about maintaining crops and metals, it is also about adjudicating the final accounts. Waters have their own mighty Yazata, Anahita, often called Arvi Sura Anahita, the strong undefiled, who is at once a river, a goddess of fertility, and a guardian of all that flows. Descriptions of her show the synchric richness of Iranian religion, with clothing of gold and jewels, a chariot drawn by white horses, associations with victory and with the womb. Yet beneath the later ornamental imagery is a simple and urgent fact. In an arid land, clean water is life, and whoever controls water controls the fate of communities. To call water sacred under the protection of Anahita is to declare that it must not be fouled. To pour libations and recite her praise at a riverbank is to acknowledge that every cup you raise has passed through her hands. Where rivers are abused, where wells are poisoned, the myth says that her anger will stir storms and failures of birth.
Among the Yazatas who are most vividly connected with the cosmic struggle is Tishtria, the shining star that later astronomers identified with Sirius. In one of the most evocative myth cycles, Tishtria battles a demon of drought known as a Pausha. The setting is not a court or a battlefield of armored men, but the ocean above the world, the great sea of clouds from which rain is drawn. Tishtria appears as a radiant white horse, racing toward the sea to draw up the waters and carry them to the thirsty earth. A Pausha appears as a black horse, lean and spiteful, trying to block the way and prevent the rains. The two crash together in a storm of hooves and spray. At first, Tishtria is weakened because men have not prayed with sufficient fervor. He begins to lose. The drought lengthens.
Then Ahura Mazda himself strengthens him with sacrifice and praise. And with this renewed power, Tishtria drives Apausha back and opens the way for the rains. The story ties the stars to the weather, the devotion of human beings to the success of gods. It says plainly that the council listens to the world and that their victories depend in part on human ritual. Even time has its yazatas. There are lesser beings who preside over each day, each month, each season. They are invoked by name in the old calendars, called upon to guard the passage of days. This careful naming shows how the Zoroastrian vision saturates reality with meaning. There's no empty hour. Every slice of time is under a patron. Every month has a character shaped by its divine overseer. When a priest recites the names, he is not rattling off a list, he is acknowledging the network of loyalties that binds heaven and earth. In a world where chaos is always pressing in, to name and order the days is a small act of resistance that aligns with the large acts of the council. At the center of this entire structure lies the concept of Asha, which the Amisha Spenta serve and embody. Asha is not simply law, though it includes law. It is not simply truth, though it is the opposite of the lie. It is the pattern according to which everything that is truly real is woven. In Zoroastrian thought, even the movement of the stars and the cycle of seasons follow Asha. When people tell the truth, keep oaths, keep fire clean, wash their hands before touching sacred things, dispose of the dead in ways that do not pollute the elements, they are participating in Asha. When they lie, break promises, let filth spread into water, or hand corpses over to rot on the soil or fall into the river, they feed drudge, the lie, the slope toward decay. The divine council exists to maintain Asha on the cosmic scale. The human community exists to echo that effort in miniature. If you imagine a map of the cosmos as the Bandish and related texts describe it, you will see regions assigned to different forces. Above the earth is the star station, where the righteous souls first gather after death if their deeds outweigh their sins. Higher still is the moon station, then the sun station, each brighter and purer than the last, each associated with particular yazatars and aspects of reward. These stations are not simply places to park souls, they are parts of the machinery that pushes back against the darkness. The stars shine in the night not only so that sailors can steer and shepherds can find their way. They shine because the host of yazatars stands there in arms, watching the movements of the divas, forming a cordon of light. When a man lying awake in a village courtyard looks up and sees a spray of constellations, he is seeing the helmets of allies. The demons that oppose this intricate order are not merely grotesque monsters, they are caricatures of the same responsibilities. There are demons of drought, demons of pollution, demons of envy.
Where the Amesha spend build, the divers unbuild it. Where the Yazatas keep contracts, the demons tempt to betrayal. The destructive spirit sends them like termites, not to topple the house in one blow, but to gnaw unseen. This is why the daily disciplines matter. What looks to a lazy mind like tedious ritual is presented in the myth as essential defense. To wash, to keep fire clean, to recite the proper words, to slaughter cattle in the correct way, to marry faithfully. All these are shown as contributions to the war effort. Every household becomes a tiny outpost of Ahura Mazda and his council, a small fortress of Asha under siege. The imagery of the council, with its immortals and worthy ones, its stars and rivers and guardians of bridges, could easily have become distant and abstract. But in the Zoroastrian telling, it is always being pulled down into the grit of daily life. The same council that oversees the passage of souls across the Chinwat Bridge is invoked over the birth of a child or the lighting of a cooking fire. The sun that is revered as a sign of Mithra sweeps across fields where farmers curse at stones and bend their backs in sweat. The water that belongs to Anahita fills simple clay jars in simple homes. The grand cosmic order is not kept intact by occasional spectacular interventions. It is upheld by constant collaboration between the high and the low, the infinite and the finite. In the high mythic view, if you could rise with your mind and look at the world the way Ahura Mazda and his council see it, you would see lines of luminous connection between every honest word and the precinct of Mithra, between every clean flame and the hall of Ashavahisha, between every act of patience in the face of hardship and the quiet smile of Spenta Mainiti. You would see dark threads too, linking acts of cruelty and lies to the swollen appetites of the Davars. You would understand that history is not simply a chain of dynasties and wars, but an immense, ceaseless transaction between the invisible council and the visible world. When kings fall and empires rise, when plagues sweep through cities and rivers flood or dry, the myth suggests that somewhere in the halls of endless light and in the camps of 1,000 stars, beings of unimaginable age are taking note, balancing ledgers, readying their next move in a contest whose end has already been written and yet must still be fought. By the time the man called Zarathustra first opened his eyes, the world was already old with compromises. Kings had come and gone, leaving behind heaps of stones and stories. The seasons kept their weary round. The fire still burned on village hearths and temple altars. But in many places, men had forgotten what it was meant to represent. They fed it blood and fat and called down favor from spirits whose names tasted of smoke and fear. The ancient war between Ashur and the Lie continued, but now it was muddied by habit. People bowed to whatever god seemed most useful, prayed for victory in battle and full bellies, and did not trouble themselves over where truth ended and the lie began. The demons had learned a more subtle game. Instead of prowling in monstrous shapes at the edge of the world, they whispered inside familiar rituals and made their homes in the laziness of the human mind. The traditions about Zarathustra's birth are stitched with omens, as if the storytellers needed the sky itself to swear that something important was happening. Some say he was born into the clan of the Spitimas in a region of cold rivers and hard pastures that the Avesta calls Aranam Va, the Aryan expanse. Somewhere in the northeast, where winter has a sharp smell and men learn early to respect water and fire, his mother Dugda dreamed of light entering her body. The fires of the village burned higher on the night he came into the world. In later books, the demons notice his birth as well. They see a new brightness on the earth, and they react the way vermin always do when a lantern is lifted. They try to smother it. One tale says that an evil spirit sends wolves in storm to destroy the newborn, only to have them turned aside by unseen hands. Another has the infant rescued by cattle, the sacred herd sheltering the future prophet with their warm bodies in a cold stall. The details vary, but the intent is clear. From the first breath, this child stands in the crosshairs of the unseen war. His first years followed a pattern that would have been familiar to many in his world and utterly foreign to ours. As a boy, he would have learned the prayers and practices of the old religion, the recited formulas addressed to various gods and spirits, the correct way to tend to fire, the respect owed to cattle, the rites for disposing of the dead so that their bodies did not pollute earth or water.
He would have watched priests chanting before the flames, watched warriors sharpening bronze blades, watched farmers hook their plows to patient oxen. The stories say that he mastered these skills easily. He could memorize long sequences of words. He could sing. He was curious, the kind of child who watched an old man perform a sacrifice and wanted to know not only how, but why. In an age when education was ritual and survival, he took to both. Most of the traditions agree on one thing. From an early age, Zarathustra was troubled by the cruelty he saw hidden inside the rituals. He watched animals killed in ways that were more about display than necessity. Blood poured out in hope of bribing one god to stand against another god. He saw men boast of sacrifices made, while they cheated their neighbors in trade or mocked the poor at the village well. The old gods themselves, the Daivas who were worshipped in many Indo-Iranian tribes, did not strike him as worthy of their offerings. Their myths were full of quarrels, hangovers, and ego. They loved thunder and plunder, and their priests loved fees. The boy, who would become the prophet, looked at this jumbled altar and felt a quiet revulsion. If the world had been built according to a straight pattern, how could the powers that ruled it be so crooked? As he grew older, that unease did not pass. He studied with priests and warriors both, learning to handle the sacred beresma rods and the bow, learning the old chants and the lore of the clans. Some sources say he left home at 20 and spent 10 years wandering, seeking answers in other schools and shrines. Whether or not the chronology is exact, the stories agree that he became a questioner. He did not break with tradition in a bright teenage rebellion. He wore the same clothes as other men, ate the same food, observed the same taboos, but inside, he was grinding at the contradictions. If there was a wise lord, as some old hymns suggested, why was he hidden behind a spectacle of petty gods? If truth was fundamental, as every honest farmer knew when he assessed the shape of a furrow or the soundness of a stone, why were men so willing to live by lies? The moment of revelation comes when Zarathustra is around 30 years old, at the age when, in many cultures, a man is expected to take his full place among his people. It happens, the stories say, during a spring festival by a river, sometimes named as the Daita, sometimes as another stream of cold, clear water running from the mountains.
The community is gathered to honor the traditional gods, with fires burning and cattle lowing, the air thick with smoke and the murmur of prayers. Zarathustra is performing his part as a priest, perhaps preparing the sacred Haoma drink or leading chants, when something singular cuts through the routine. He goes to the river to draw water, and there the world changes. He later describes what occurs in language that is part poetry and part report. The first being he sees is Vohumana, good mind, in the form of a radiant figure who appears by the riverbank and asks him if he is ready to leave the old path. The presence of Vohumana is not a vision of vague light. It is a clarity that pierces him, a sense that his own mind is being aligned with a larger intelligence. Led by this guide, he finds himself in the presence of Ahura Mazda and the Amesha Spentas, the council of which he had perhaps heard only in hints and broken older hymns. Now he does not hear about them, he experiences them. Truth is not an idea, but a vast presence that stands before him as Ashavahishta. Devotion is not a mood, but the deep patience of Spenta Armaiti. Health is not an accident, but Hudavat watching over waters. Immortality is not a wish, but Ameritat standing where life overflows death. The wise Lord himself is there, not in the crude form of an idol, but as the source from which all these beings flow.
In later Gothic verses that Zoroastrian tradition attributes directly to Zarathustra, you catch echoes of this vision. He speaks to Ahura Mazda with the familiarity of one who has been in that presence and survived. He speaks of the two primal spirits, one choosing truth, one choosing the lie, of the entire history of the world being shaped by that first moral divergence.
He insists that the divers are not gods at all, but creatures of bad thought, unworthy of worship, allied with anger. This is not a polite adjustment of the old religion. It is a sword stroke in a world where it was common to honor many deities for different needs. He declares a single wise lord and demotes the rest to the status of hostile spirits. In a culture where ritual correctness had often overshadowed ethics, he insists that the heart of religion is moral choice, good thoughts, good words, good deeds. If those are wrong, no amount of sacrifice will produce anything but smoke. The shock of that realization does not make his life easier. When the vision ends, he is still a man standing by a river with water on his hands and the smell of smoke in his clothes. The village still expects him to play his role, but something fundamentally has shifted. The Gathas show him wrestling, not in doubt over the reality of what he has seen, but in grief and frustration over how few people are willing to listen. He returns to his own people and begins to teach this clarified faith, calling men and women to reject divas, to honor Ahura Mazda alone, to align their lives with Asha. He speaks of the reward for the righteous and the punishment for the wicked after death, of the Chinvat Bridge where each soul will be judged, of the final renovation of the world when evil will be destroyed. These are not entirely new ideas, but he sharpens them, sets them like stakes in the ground. The response from his own clan is mostly cold. The priests of the old cult hear his denunciations of divas and see not lofty theology, but a direct threat to their position. If no one needs to propitiate this or that spirit with elaborate sacrifice, if the emphasis shifts from quantity of offerings to quality of conscience, what will happen to their entrenched power? The warriors are not pleased to be told that raiding and slaughter have moral consequences that cannot be cleaned away with a few ritual words. The wealthy do not enjoy hearing that their treatment of servants and debtors will be weighed as carefully as their temple gifts. Even his own family is torn. Some support him, others are embarrassed or afraid. In several stories, he is driven into exile. So begins a long period of wandering for the prophet. He travels from settlement to settlement with a small band of followers, which early on consists mainly of his cousin Maido Manga and a few others. You can imagine him in simple clothes, staff in hand, stepping into dust-blown courtyards and asking for a hearing. He would speak without the glamour of temples. His voice would rise above the noise of children and animals, cutting through the bustle with the austere weight of his message. There is one unseen God who created all. The world is a battlefield between truth and lie. Every one of you is a soldier in that war. Your choices matter more than your rituals. Feed your cattle well. Keep your promises. Keep the fire clean. Do not pollute water. Do not worship demons. The world as you know it will end in a vast judgment. Align yourselves now while there is time. There is something almost unbearably modern in the loneliness of this figure, trudging through an unconverted world with a doctrine that seems too abstract for people whose main concern is whether the next winter will kill their herd. Many do not listen. Some mock him. The divas in the stories rage at him. They send temptations and terrors, try to silence him with threats and bribes. He resists, because once you have stood before the wise Lord and the council of immortals, the old spirits look small.
Still, the human difficulty of his mission is real. He needs a base, a community powerful enough to shelter his teaching. Without that, His revelations will be a fire that flickered and went out in the wind. The change comes when he reaches the court of King Vishtaspa, a land of horsemen and fortress towns, where a strong king can gather armies and priests in a sun-baked hall. Vishtaspa is presented as a complex figure, neither tyrant nor saint, a man of power surrounded by advisors who are not eager to see their master adopt a new faith. Zarathustra appears at this court not as a conquering magician, but as a stranger with a song. He seeks an audience, explains his doctrine, recites his gathas, and is met at first with skepticism and hostility. The existing priests, whose gods he calls demons, whisper in the king's ear, "Why listen to a vagabond from a minor clan who calls our gods false and claims to know the secrets of the universe?" The legends embroider what follows with the bright colors of miracle. One story tells that the king's favorite horse is struck down, its legs drawn up into its body by a demon's curse, leaving it sagging and helpless. None of the court magicians can help. Zarathustra offers to heal the animal if the king will listen to his teaching without prejudice. Vishtaspa agrees grudgingly. The prophet lays his hands on the horse, prays to Ahura Mazda, and gradually the legs emerge again, one by one, until the animal stands whole. Another tale has him survive a trial by ordeal or demonstrate his insight by revealing hidden things. Whether you take these episodes as literal marvels or as symbolic statements that his wisdom restored what the old cult had crippled, their narrative purpose is the same. They show a hard man brought to attention by something he cannot explain away. Vishtaspa listens. The Gathers preserve echoes of the dialogue that follows with the king and his wife Hutosa asking questions about creation, about the nature of the two spirits, about the fate of the soul after death. Zarathustra answers with the stark confidence of one who has received his information from the source. He describes the path of the righteous soul ascending to the star, moon, and sun stations, greeted by its own Dana, its inner self, that appears as a beautiful maiden if it has lived well, or as a hideous figure if it has lived badly. He explains the Chinvat Bridge, wide as a highway for those whose good deeds outweigh their evil, narrow as a razor for those who chose the lie. He speaks of the House of Song, the realm of Ahura Mazda, and the House of Worst Existence, the dwelling of demons and damned. He tells of a future savior, Shant, who will be born in a distant age from a maiden impregnated by the seed of Zarathustra, preserved in the waters of a sacred lake, a figure who will lead the final battle against evil and preside over the resurrection of the dead. These teachings, with their grave beauty and their emphasis on justice, do not leave Vishtaspa unmoved. The king and queen Hutosa are eventually converted, and with their conversion, the whole axis of the story tilts. The lonely prophet with a handful of followers now has a royal patron. The new faith is no longer a rumor wandering in from the steppe. It has a throne. Fire temples begin to appear, supported by royal wealth. Places where the sacred flame is kept burning on stone altars, where priests recite the gathas and newer prayers, where worship is given to Ahura Mazda and the Amishir Spentas rather than to the old pantheon of divers. Laws are written that reflect the prophet's ethical concerns.
Protecting cattle and family, setting standards for honesty in trade, codifying the handling of corpses so that the elements are not polluted. For Zarathustra himself, this victory does not mean an easy old age. Tradition holds that he continues to compose hymns and instruct disciples, deepening the liturgy and clarifying doctrine. The Gathas have passages of joy, passages of weariness, passages where he pleads with Ahura Mazda to give strength to those who follow the truth, in a world that still yields easily to the lie. His personal life is touched by both happiness and loss. He marries, has children, watches them grow up in a court that is now officially devoted to his god, but still haunted by old loyalties and resentments. The demons do not stop attacking simply because the king has changed sides. There are conspiracies, setbacks, persecutions of his followers in regions that have not accepted the new teaching. The war between Asha and Druj has simply entered a new phase, one in which the wise lord's strategy now includes an organized human community consciously aligned with his will. Some later stories say that Zarathustra dies as violently as any warrior, killed in a fire temple by an invading enemy who strikes him down while he stands before the flame. Others imagine a quieter passing, an old prophet returning to the light he first saw at the river. The scriptures themselves are silent on the matter, interested more in the living message than in the circumstances of death. In either case, his departure from the world does not end his role in the mythic drama. His seed, literally and figuratively, is said to endure, preserved for the future scions who will arise at the appointed times. His words set into the weave of ritual are repeated by priestly mouths across centuries.
Every time a Zoroastrian recites one of the gathas in the original tongue, the cadence carries the memory of that first voice and the moment on the riverbank when a man saw the wise lord and chose to stake his life on that site. The figure of Zarathustra that looks back at us from these traditions is not a bland sage floating above history. He is a man of his time and place, walking among cattle and warriors, arguing before kings, enduring mockery and exile, wrestling with the stubbornness of his own people. Yet through him, the entire cosmic story becomes personal. What had been described in grand terms as a war between spirits becomes a choice at the level of a single mind, a single mouth. Through him, Ahura Mazda's counsel speaks directly into human society, not as a vague rumor, but as a detailed program for how to think, speak, and act in a world that will someday be judged. Through him, a scattered set of ancient insights hardens into one of the great ethical religions of the world, with its insistence that history is moving toward a final reckoning, and that every action, however small, helps push the world toward that day. When the voice of a prophet fades, the world looks around for something solid to carry his words. In Iran, that weight settled on stone and flame and on the shoulders of kings. Zarathustra had walked beside rivers and through dust-blown courtyards, speaking of Ahura Mazda and the two primal spirits, of the bridge of judgment and the final renewal. For a time, his teaching had a human face and a human voice. After his death, the message had to learn the language of empire. Fire, which had always been a sign of Asha, now became the center of royal ritual. Kings who traced their legitimacy through Vishtaspa began to see themselves as the living ramparts of the wise lord, temporal guardians of the spiritual order.
In their courts, the old myths shifted from campfire stories to state theology. The land itself was changing. The patchwork of clans and small kingdoms in which Zarathustra had preached would give rise to a power that astonished the ancient world. Cyrus, whom later generations would call the Great, rose from the Persian tribes and broke the domination of the Medes. He took Babylon without a siege of legend, stepped through its gates, and presented himself not as a barbarian conqueror, but as a restorer of order. The clay cylinders that carry his proclamations are written in the language of Mesopotamian tradition, but behind them lies an Iranian sense of kingship, already colored by Mazdanian ideas. A king is legitimate only if he protects truth and justice,
only if his rule brings prosperity instead of chaos. The wise lord may not be named in those Babylonian texts, yet in Iranian memory, Cyrus stands as a model of righteous rulership, a man whose kavarinar, his royal glory, blazed so brightly that later kings would invoke his name when they invoked Ahura Mazda. It is with Darius, though, that the union of throne and flame comes fully into focus. When you stand before the cliff at Behistun in present-day Western Iran and look up at the carved relief and the long inscription, you are looking at scripture cut into a mountain. Darius has himself carved tall and straight upon a stone platform, 1 foot upon a rebel who lies bound. Above him, in a disk of winged light, floats a figure with a beard and a raised hand, the sign of Ahura Mazda. The god is not rendered as a full man striding. He is a presence in the air, emerging from a ring that some see as the symbol of eternity. The king stands below, accepting the favor, his hand raised in respect.
The inscription around this image speaks repeatedly of the wise lord. Darius tells how Ahura Mazda created the earth and the sky and mankind, how he gave kingship to Darius because he favors the one who does not lie. Again and again, in line after line, the king insists that he has crushed rebellion and maintained order because the lie is hateful to Ahura Mazda and must be destroyed. There is a dark beauty in that marriage of piety and force. On the one hand, you have a ruler who publicly swears that his power is conditional. If he lies, if he fails in justice, he knows that Ahura Mazda can take his glory away. On the other hand, every rebel becomes not only a political opponent, but an ally of the lie. Every revolt, a hint of cosmic treachery. This is the tension that runs through the whole history of Zoroastrian kingship. Asha is the standard, but who decides where Asha ends and self-interest begins? Darius punishes usurpers and inscribes their names in stone as liars and traitors to the wise lord. Somewhere in the dust below the cliff, mothers mourn sons whose faces were never carved. The mythology of truth sits on a platform of corpses. The wise lord does not speak in his own voice to correct the record. Men speak in his name. In the palaces at Persepolis, the great ceremonial capital that Darius and his successors raised from a rocky terrace, the language of fire and order becomes architecture. The columns of the audience halls rise like spears. Reliefs show delegations from every province of the empire bringing tribute. Files of men in carefully carved costume leading animals or bearing vessels of gold. There is an overwhelming sense of harmony, of a world arranged in tiers and led toward a central point. Somewhere in these spaces, perhaps in a separate sanctuary or atop a tower, there would have been an altar where the sacred flame burned.
The exact layout of early imperial fire temples remains a matter of scholarly argument, but the practice of tending a pure fire under priestly watch is beyond doubt. The Magi, that priestly tribe mentioned even by Greek writers, kept the fires alive on behalf of king and people, chanting parts of the Avesta, reciting the gathas that carried the memory of Zarathustra. The daily life of a fire temple in Achaemenid and later times fused cosmic myth with exacting discipline. The fire itself was usually kindled from several sources considered pure, such as lightning strikes or the hearths of righteous households, then combined and consecrated. Once established, it had to be kept burning without interruption. The priests fed it dry, clean wood. They covered their mouths with cloth so that their breath would not pollute the flame. They approached with bare feet and washed hands, carrying the fuel in specific ways, chanting as they went.
Around the fire, certain laws of purity held with iron weight. No corpse could come near, no rotting thing could be allowed within its precinct. The temple stood as a small model of the orderly cosmos, a place where Asha was given its proper due, where the lie was barred at the threshold. These fires came to be graded and ranked. In later centuries, the highest grade, called the Fire of Victory or of the King, would burn in grand temples that also served as treasuries and political symbols. A king who kept such a fire properly was not just managing ritual, he was demonstrating his role as upholder of creation. When he rode out to war, he could imagine that the flame behind him was a banner brighter than any cloth, a piece of the original light of Mazda that his forefathers had carried across generations. Travelers who climbed the hill to such a temple on a cold night would see the glow from afar, a hearth for more than one village.
For a people who revered fire as the visible face of truth, these towers and altars were as important as fortresses. The close partnership between royal power and Zoroastrian faith did not mean that every Persian king was a saint or a theologian. Cyrus respected the gods of the lands he conquered and allowed exiled peoples to return home. Darius carved his devotion in stone. Xerxes is remembered in Greek accounts as a vandal in foreign temples and a man of sometimes erratic temper. Yet in his own inscriptions, he too invokes Ahura Mazda and prays for protection against the lie. Later rulers within the same tradition would fall into intrigues and murders as bloody as anything in the sagas of other lands. The Magi themselves, guardians of the flame, were not immune to the temptations of influence. Their control over ritual and purity laws gave them leverage in court. There are stories of priestly factions using religious arguments to undercut rival nobles, of kings balancing alliances between clan chiefs and temple elites. Then was the shock of the Macedonian storm. Alexander, marching east from Greece, smashed the power of the Achaemenids and burned the palace at Persepolis in an act that some say was drunken vandalism and others see as cold political theater. Flames that were meant to symbolize the wise lord now leapt along cedar beams and carved lintels, consuming the works of generations. For Zoroastrians, this catastrophe became one of the great turning points in sacred history. The age of the good kings who supported the faith collapsed. Foreigners took the throne, and although some of the old practices continued in rural and private settings, the imperial marriage between fire and kingship was broken. The texts speak of this era as one of confusion. When parts of the Avesta were lost or scattered, when priests had to flee and hide their traditions, out of that long twilight grew new dynasties, the Seleucids with their Greek language, the Parthians with their powerful cavalry and looser confederation of noble houses. Through all these changes, the Zoroastrian faith persisted like an ember at the bottom of a hearth. House fires were still tended with care. Local shrines kept flames alive. Mobile priests carried ritual knowledge from one noble family to another. The great gathering and systematizing of the religion would not come until the rise of the Sasanian kings. But in these intervening centuries, in frontier fortresses and village courtyards, people still told the stories of Gyomat and Yima, still recited the name of Ahura Mazda when they saw the sun rise over a line of black hills. When Ardashir, founder of the Sasanian line, finally seized power in the 3rd century of the Common Era, he did so under the sign of a renewed alliance between sword and fire. His family traced its roots to guardians of a local fire temple in Perseus. This gave his claim a double edge. He was both noble and priestly, a man of war who could also present himself as the chosen restorer of the true faith.
The rock relief at Nakshir Rustam, carved near the old Achaemenid tombs, shows him on horseback receiving the royal ring from Ahura Mazda, while both king and god trample fallen enemies. Beneath the hooves lies the defeated Parthian ruler, and beneath Ahura Mazda's mount lies a prone figure interpreted as the god of lies or a rival claimant. Once again, divine and human victory are carved together. Ardashir is telling the world that his throne is a direct extension of Mazda's will, that he has revived an ancient compact.
Under Ardashir and his son Shapur and their descendants, Zoroastrianism becomes unmistakably the state religion. Fire temples are built and rebuilt, some on hilltops as citadels of light, others within fortified complexes that combine ritual with administration. Priests are organized into a hierarchy with a chief Mobad at the top, a high priest who advises the king and helps shape law. The canon of scripture is gathered, edited, and expanded in Middle Persian, drawing on older Avestan verses and later commentaries. Legal codes are produced that weave religious purity rules into civil regulation, touching everything from inheritance to penalties for pollution. The burial customs that had long required corpses to be exposed so that earth and fire and water are not tainted are now strictly enforced, with towers built near cities where the dead are left for birds and the bones later gathered. The Sasanians also intensify the mythic aura of their rule through the concept of Kavarena. Royal glory is presented as an almost physical fire that adheres to the worthy. In epic tales preserved later in the Shahnameh and other works, kings who act unjustly see this glory leave them in the form of a bird or a blazing radiance that departs and settles on a more deserving figure. This is not simply poetic fantasy. It expresses a deeply Zoroastrian idea that legitimacy is spiritual and can be lost through moral failure. A just king who protects the faith, builds fire temples, supports the poor, and resists the lie will glow with Kavarena. An unjust king, no matter how strong his army, will eventually find his glory gone and his throne shaking. Yet the union of Zoroastrianism and Sasanian kingship has its shadows. Religious minorities within the empire, including Christians, Jews, and later emerging movements, sometimes find themselves under pressure or direct persecution, especially when foreign powers share their creed.
The priests who guard orthodoxy can be suspicious of theological experiment. When a new prophet arises among the people, speaking of new revelations or strange blends of doctrines, the response from court and temple is often swift and harsh. In this, the heirs of Zarathustra show themselves as much men of their age as servants of their god. They are capable of seeing their faith not only as a path to righteousness, but as a marker of identity that must be defended against dilution with all the tools of law and force. Still, for all its hardness, the Sasanian vision of a Zoroastrian empire is one in which cosmic myth and daily governance are tightly interlaced. The king rises in the morning and offers prayers to Ahura Mazda before turning to petitions from generals and satraps. The high priest oversees the copying of sacred texts and also advises on tax policy. Farmers sow grain under calendars that include the names of Yazatas. The fire temple is both a spiritual center and a symbol on royal seals. Messengers carry dispatches from Ctesiphon across mountains and deserts, and as they pass through towns, they see the glow of sacred fires along their route like station lamps. When the armies of Islam arrived from the west in the 7th century, bringing a new scripture and a fierce new monotheism, they encounter this tightly woven fabric. The fall of the Sasanian Empire is political and military, but for Zoroastrians, it is also a shattering of the old marriage between throne and flame. Fire temples are closed, converted, or abandoned.
Some priests and nobles convert to the new faith, seeking advantage or survival. Others cling to their traditions in shrinking enclaves. Groups of Zoroastrians eventually flee east to Gujarat and other regions of India, becoming the Parsis, who will keep the fire burning on foreign soil.
Those who remain in Iran adapt to minority existence, their rituals compressed but not extinguished. Through all of this, the mythic imagination does not stop working. Later texts, composed in the post-Sasanian period, reinterpret the loss of empire as another phase in the cosmic war, a long night before a promised dawn. Stories are told of hidden fires kept alive in cellars and mountain shrines, of kings in exile who still dream of restoring Mazda's kingdom. The idea that history is a corridor of 12,000 years with a fixed end allows believers to see even the crushing of their institutions as a passing phase. The flame on the altar may be doused by men, but the fire of Ashur that burns in the heart of the wise Lord cannot be so easily quenched. In this chapter of the saga, the figure of the king is never simple. He is at once a champion of truth and a wielder of violence, a man who kneels before the sacred fire and then orders campaigns that will kill thousands, a protector of law whose ministers may take bribes in his name. Yet within that contradiction lies a core image that persists: the righteous ruler, the one who truly embodies the teaching of Zarathustra, is imagined as a man who keeps the fire pure, who hears the counsel of wise priests but is not their puppet, who punishes the lie even when it would be convenient to use it, who sees his Kavarana not as a private possession but as a trust from Ahura Mazda. It is an ideal rarely fully realized, but its presence as an expectation shapes the stories people tell about their past and the hopes they whisper about their future. If you step back from the bright moments of revelation and coronation, from the clean flame on temple altars and the chiseled boasts of kings, the story of this world, as the Zoroastrians tell it, is not a string of triumphs. It is a long war of attrition. The prophet had said from the beginning that time itself was shaped as a corridor of struggle.
12,000 years carved out within the endless light so that the lie could run its course and be answered. That corridor is divided into ages, each with its own flavor of pain. The first 3,000 years saw spiritual creation and the first material world. The next 3,000 absorbed the shock of Angra Mainyu's assault and the early reign of Yema. With the coming of Zarathustra and the kings who took his side, the universe crossed the midway point. From there on, the texts say, the battle grows more intense and more personal. The ages that follow are not polite declines, they are ages of strife. The old priests like to describe the present as a mixed world, where good and evil are intertwined in every field and every heart. In the earliest times, cattle and men had known periods without sickness. That mercy ended long ago. Now disease moves through herds like a shadow and passes on to villages, taking children with no regard for the piety of their parents. The demons who once attacked the primordial bull from outside now operate from within the body itself. They appear as fevers, as wasting infirmities, as slow rotting of joints and organs. To the mythic mind, every sickness is an attempted assassination carried out by servants of Angro. Physicians, when they work honestly, are not simply professionals. They are allies of Hawat and Amoritat, of health and immortality, resisting the creeping dissolution of the flesh. Every time a healer refuses to give in to despair and continues to fight for a patient, he is hauling on a rope that stretches back to the first creation. The same harsh blend of the mundane and the cosmic shows in the way Zoroastrian law speaks of injustice and social breakdown.
There are passages in later Pahlavi texts that read like reports from a collapsing frontier. Judges take bribes, rulers favor the rich and grind a poor. Thieves grow confident because punishment is rare. Craftsmen abandon the care of their work and accept shoddy results. Children forget the stories of their ancestors and repeat foreign songs without understanding what they mean. The writers of these passages are not simply nostalgic conservatives longing for earlier days. They are theologians who see in every crooked verdict and every lazy omission the hand of specific demons. Ashema, the spirit of furious violence, rejoices in civil war and drunken brawls. Bushyasta, the demon of sloth, rejoices when a man who knows he should rise for prayer rolls over and goes back to sleep. Spite has a name. Cowardice has a name. Every vice is personified, given a face and a voice so that no one can pretend that it comes from nowhere. Over all these personal failures hangs a developing sense of collective decline. Some of the most haunting apocalyptic writings of the tradition, such as the text known as the Zand of Wanyasan, present visions of successive future ages in which the signs of corruption become more blatant. There are prophecies of years when rain will not fall at the proper time, when the seasons will blur and harvests will become unreliable. Crops will sprout but not ripen. Animals will give birth to weak and sickly offspring. The quality of food will decline. People will eat more and be nourished less. The land itself will seem tired, as if Spentha Almighty, the genius of earth, has been worn down by constantly bearing the weight of those who walk upon her without gratitude. In these visions, metals too are degraded. Gold and silver become scarce or impure.
Iron, the metal of weapons and tools, is forged into instruments of oppression rather than justice. Kashurava, the dominion that should guarantee protection, is twisted into tyranny. Weapons meant for defense are turned on neighbors. Kings forget their obligation to uphold Asher and instead sell judgment to the highest bidder. The royal glory, the Karina that once clung to righteous rulers like a halo, flares around men who have never spoken honestly in their lives. It is not that the spiritual laws have changed. It is that the world has shifted into that part of the long corridor where the lie is allowed to show its teeth without disguise, so that when judgment comes, there will be no one who can claim ignorance of what evil really is. The chroniclers of these dark ages do not content themselves with broad social pictures. They go down to the level of the household. They predict days when respect between generations will fray. Sons will speak to fathers without deference. Mothers will resent daughters. Marriage will be treated as a temporary convenience rather than a solemn contract guarded by Mithra. And so the demon of broken oaths will find a throne at many tables. Hospitality will be grudging. The stranger at the gate will be treated as a threat more quickly than as a guest. This erosion of basic decency is presented as one of the clearest signs that the world is moving toward a decisive crisis. When ordinary people no longer see one another as fellow soldiers in the fight for Asher, but as obstacles or prey, the great enemy has done most of his work. Underlying all of this is a calendar of hope. The same texts that speak of famine and betrayal also speak of saviors yet to come. Zarathustra in the oldest Gathas had already hinted that his work was part of a larger series, that there would be future Syotians.
Benefactors who would arise in later ages to rekindle the faith. Later tradition gives these figures names and tentative dates. In one scheme, the last 9,000 years of the cosmic plan are divided into 3 periods of 3,000 years each marked by the appearance of a savior born from the miraculously preserved seed of Zarathustra. The first is called Ukshyata Eretha, he who makes truth grow. The second is Ukshyat Nema, he who makes reverence grow. The third, who will appear at the very end of time as we know it, is Astat Eretha, so closely bound to the concept of righteousness made living that his name is sometimes simply rendered as the Sashyant. These saviors are not distant abstractions. In the imagination of the faithful, they are flesh and blood, will walk upon dusty roads and speak in tongues men can understand. The tradition situates their birth around a sacred lake where heavenly beings guard the seed of the prophet in its waters. Young maidens of pure life will come to that lake to wash, and one of them will be overshadowed and conceive without the touch of a man. The son she bears will grow up aware of his calling. Each Satyant will stand against the rising tide of drudge in his age, calling people back to honor Ahura Mazda and the Amesha Spentas, challenging corrupt rulers, strengthening the weak. They are not expected to win easily. The very names of their missions imply struggle. To make truth grow in a world where the soil has been salted with lies is work that will cost blood and tears. Between these peaks of savior lie long centuries in which the ordinary faithful must hold the line. The Pahlavi books paint a picture of these ages that is both bleak and strangely bracing. They speak of times when the Zoroastrian community will be reduced to a small remnant scattered across foreign lands.
Their fire temples razed or repurposed, their priests forced to pass on the Avesta in secret. They foretell seasons when evil teachers will arise, dressed in the language of piety, but smuggling in doctrines that contradict the prophet. There will be preachers who call the lie good and the good harmful. There will be false miracles, impressive displays that convince the lazy-minded that Angra carries the true power. Those who cling to the original teaching will do so at great cost. They will lose property, status, sometimes their lives. Yet the texts insist that their reward will be weighty. Every insult endured for the sake of Asha becomes a jewel in their crown beyond the Chinwat Bridge. The sense of spiritual siege becomes more vivid when the demon host is enumerated. Eshma of the bloody mace is imagined raging in battlefields and kitchens alike, whenever tempers break and fists fly. Indra, in the inverted Zoroastrian usage, is a deva of apostasy, leading people away from the worship of Ahura Mazda. Saru haunts the councils of rulers, pushing them toward harsh punishments and harsh words. The picture that emerges is one in which the age of strife is not distinguished by some entirely new evil, but by the increasing success of these familiar enemies. They are ancient spirits, whose work becomes easier as human vigilance wanes. Bushasta stretches out people's nights so that they sleep through dawn prayers. The demon of despondency whispers that nothing matters because the world is too far gone to be saved. The mythology answers that despair itself is a victory for the opponent. To give up on Asha because the lie seems to be winning is to switch sides. For the individual soul, these ages of hardness sharpen the meaning of every decision. Zoroastrian teaching about the afterlife had always emphasized the weighing of deeds.
But in an era felt as especially corrupt, the doctrine takes on a desperate urgency. The journey after death, as described in the books, becomes a kind of mirror in which the ages are reflected. After 3 nights of staying near the corpse, hearing the cries of mourners and the first hints of decay, the soul sets out toward the Chinvat Bridge, accompanied by its Dina, its inner self made visible. For those who have lived according to Asha, that companion appears as a beautiful maiden, strong and radiant, who leads them forward with encouraging speech. For those who have lived by the lie, the Dina appears twisted, foul, contemptuous, a figure that embodies all their neglected responsibilities and spurned chances. At the bridge stand Srosha, Mitra, and Rashnu. Srosha, obedience, is there to testify to the person's prayers and acts of worship. Mitra, guardian of oaths, remembers every promise kept or broken. Rashnu, the straight judge, holds the scales. The books are clear that no bribe can influence this weighing. Kings and beggars stand in the same wind. If good thoughts, words, and deeds outweigh their opposites, the bridge widens and the soul passes into the luminous realms. If the balance tilts toward evil, the bridge narrows to a blade and the soul falls into choking darkness. There is also a third possibility for those whose deeds are almost exactly balanced. They go to a middle region, neither bliss nor torment, a gray waiting place until the final reckoning. The more corrupt the age, the more people fear this judgment, and the more they long for the promised Saoshyants, who will help tilt history itself back toward the good. One might expect that such an outlook would produce only heavy hearts, yet there is in the Zoroastrian vision of the ages of strife an undercurrent of fierce, almost stubborn confidence.
The very fact that Ahura Mazda revealed the timeline and the coming of saviors is treated as proof that he has not abandoned the world. He does not pretend that things will improve steadily through human effort. He warns that they will get worse. But he also promises that in the worst moments, he will raise up leaders whose presence will make it impossible to say that no one knew the right path. There is a grim courtesy in this. The lie is given space to show what it really is. The truth is given heralds in every age. When the end comes, no soul will be able to claim that it had no hint of which side it was on. In the minds of later generations living through invasion and loss of empire, we can hear how these myths became both explanation and lifeline. When Arabs, carrying the green banners of Islam, conquered the Sasanian realm, when fire temples were closed and new houses of worship rose, many Zoroastrians interpreted the shock through the lens of the woman Yazan and similar visions. They saw the rise of foreign rule and new religious laws as signs that the world had entered one of the darker sequences of the corridor. Some converted and tried to reconcile the new doctrine with the old. Others fled, carrying with them into exile the hope that their suffering was not random, but part of an ordained testing in fires kept in hidden shrines in Iran or in new temples in India. Priests told their congregations that these troubles had been foretold. The demons were having a season of success. The lie was wearing new costumes. It would not win in the end. So the ages of strife roll on, a rising series of waves in which men and women are forced again and again to decide whether they will ride with the flood or dig their heels into the sand.
The cosmic story that began with spiritual light and a first assault on an unwounded world now has the texture of crowded streets, empty granaries, broken promises, and occasional acts of astonishing courage in the face of a general drift into cowardice. Somewhere in these centuries, at times hidden and at times proclaimed, the figures of the promised Saoshyans move closer to the edge of the stage. The wise lord watches. The destructive spirit rages and celebrates each temporary victory. The Amesha Spenta and the demon host lean over the rails of their unseen realms, counting each choice. By the time the last savior steps into the story, the corridor of time that Ahura Mazda carved out at the beginning is almost used up. The ages of strife have done their work. The world is worn thin in places like a cloak that has been mended and stained and pulled at for so long that even its strongest seams are fraying. The signs that the old texts whispered about are everywhere. Winters bite without mercy. Summers parch the ground until it splits. Kings rise and fall with astonishing speed, caring less and less about justice and more about clawing a few years of power out of the chaos. The poor do not remember what it felt like to trust judges. Priests argue over words while the fires in their temples grow smaller. Men and women wake in the gray hour before dawn, listen to the wind sliding over rooftops, and feel a tired suspicion that the world is not simply in trouble, but nearing the end of its allowance. And yet, even here, along this cracked edge of history, the myth insists that the plan has never swerved. Long before this dark twilight, when Zarathustra still walked under hard mountain skies, the wise lord had spoken of one who would come when the world was ripe for ending. The priests tell it like this.
In a lake hidden in a remote land, often named as the waters of Kansoya, or as Lake Fradon, or some other sacred basin, the seed of the prophet was preserved. When Zarathustra's body died, his spiritual vitality did not drift aimlessly. It was gathered by divine hands and entrusted to the water, guarded by heavenly beings. For ages, that lake has waited, its waves lapping its stony shores while shepherds water flocks and birds skim low over the surface, unaware that below them lies a promise.
The world can grow as corrupt as it likes, but the seed of renewal is already in storage. The last savior, the final sociant, is called by a name that means very simply the embodied righteousness, astatva erita. He will not be born in a palace or in the house of a famous lineage. The stories say his mother will be a maiden who comes to that lake to bathe, a girl who has kept her life clean in a time when cleanliness of any kind is rare. As she steps into the water and submerges herself, the hidden seed will quicken in her womb. No man will lie with her. She will conceive by contact with the power that has been sleeping in the depths. Around her, people will keep going about their business. They will see her pregnancy and shrug. The world is full of births. No one will guess that this one child carries at his center the continuation of the same fire that burned in Zarathustra beside the river when the wise Lord first revealed himself. The boy will grow in an age that looks from the outside completely unsurprising in its cruelty. He will see the same things that troubled the first prophet, but magnified. Animals slaughtered wastefully, rivers used as drains, men who wear the garments of priests selling blessings for silver while they themselves break every rule they recite. Rulers who invoke the names of just kings while signing decrees that starve villages.
Children made old before their time by hunger and fear. In such a setting, it would be easy to become numb. That is what the demons want, because numbness is a kind of surrender. But the Saoshyant is born with a mind that cannot quite make peace with ugliness. The stories imagine him as someone who from an early age feels an almost physical ache when he sees injustice, who lies awake with questions that others have trained themselves not to ask. He is troubled the way Zarathustra was troubled. But his trouble has deeper layers because he knows at some instinctive level that he has been sent not only to preach, but to finish. When his time comes, the call will not be a gentle suggestion. It will arrive like a tearing of curtains inside his awareness. Some accounts speak of a revelation much like that of Zarathustra, a direct encounter with Ahura Mazda and the Amisha Spentas, the same blazing council that stands at the beginning of all things. In that encounter, the strands of history are laid bare. He sees Gaiamard glowing in the first world. He sees Yima building the Var against the deadly winter. He sees Zarathustra beside the river, Darius carving his boasts into stone, priests sheltering flames while invaders ride past their doors, exiled communities tending their faith in foreign lands. He sees the cycles of decline and half-restoration. He sees the demons laughing and the faithful gritting their teeth and holding on. It is not a pleasant vision. It is overwhelming. It presses his soul between the stones of time. When it releases him, he knows that the long waiting is over. The last phase has begun. The Saoshyant's mission has two phases. One is proclamation, the other is reconstitution. He must call the living to repent, to align themselves openly with Ahura Mazda, because in the days ahead there will be no neutral ground. He must also prepare for an act that no prophet before him has attempted. He must oversee the raising of the dead in preparation for final judgment. The texts that speak of him in the Pahlavi era treat this with a matter-of-fact confidence that can feel more unsettling than any wild apocalyptic image. They say that by his prayer and by the command of Ahura Mazda, the dead will be called back to bodily life. Bones that have lain scattered in dust or gathered in ossuaries or washed out to sea will be assembled. Flesh will form on them again. Souls that for ages have dwelt in the house of song or the house of worst existence or the middle place will be ordered to return. The imagination of later theologians lingers on that moment. Picture a valley at dawn, where there has been nothing but grass and stones for 1,000 years. Suddenly, the ground heaves and splits. Hands shove up through the soil. Skulls knit themselves with necks and spines. The air fills with the sound of people drawing first breath, not in the small whimper of newborns, but in the surprised gasp of those who remember suffocating and now inhale clean air. Across the world this occurs, on battlefields, in ruined cities, on mountain slopes, in deserts where caravans once vanished. The seed gives up the drowned. The vultures, long ago fed on towers of silence, are not forced to vomit their meals, but their meals return anyway, drawn together by a summons that no creature can ignore. This is not a metaphor in the myth, it is a logistical event. Every human being who has ever lived, from the first pair grown from the seed of Gaiamart to the last child born under a collapsing sky, stands upright again. For many, the first shock after that return will be recognition. Families will know one another. Fathers will see sons who died young. Lovers parted by war or persecution will find each other in the crush. Enemies will lock eyes. There will be joy that cracks the heart and horror that freezes the blood. Across this tide of reunion moves the figure of the Saoshyant, not as a distant general, but as a shepherd of multitudes, urging them toward the place where the final weighing will occur. For all these resurrected souls, the small private moment by the Chinvat bridge that followed death now opens into something larger. They are to be judged not only as individuals, but as a species. Creation itself is on trial. Angrimanu does not allow this to happen without protest. The myths of the last battle differ in details, but they agree that the destructive spirit and his host will make a final effort to spoil the plan. The Devas will rally. Ashishma will stir up panic. Dukes, spirits of deceit, will spread rumors in the vast crowd. There will be a 3-day period, some texts say, of intense darkness or of confused terror, in which it will seem for a time as if the lie might yet snatch a victory out of the jaws of its own inevitable defeat. But by this point in the timeline, there is a weakness in the dark that was not present at the beginning. Evil has spent itself. Every malicious act, every cruelty, every stubborn refusal to accept truth has been another expenditure of its limited power. The wise Lord allowed the lie to have an era so that it could exhaust its own potential. Now, when it gathers its forces for one last strike, it does so with a core that is already hollowed by its own choices. The armies of the unseen line up. On one side stand the Amsaspentas and the Yazatas, their legions of light stretching from horizon to horizon. Mithra, guardian of covenants, with eyes like the sun at noon. Srashya, whose ears have never missed a single genuine prayer. Rashnu, holding his straight scales. Anuta, with waters that can sweep filth from stone. Tishria, bright in the sky like a spear tip. Behind them are the souls of the righteous, not armed with swords in earthly fashion, but with the beauty of their deeds, which in this realm are weapons. On the other side whirls the chaos of the demon host, a crowd of twisted forms that represent envy and greed and rage and despair in 1,000 shapes. At their center, like a shadow that eats light, is anger. Mind you, the battle is not described in detail the way human wars are. There are no lists of regiments or maneuvers of cavalry. The focus is more elemental. Fire and molten metal are the chosen instruments. The mountains that have stood since the first making of the earth begin to melt. All the hidden ore veins liquefy at once. Streams of searing metal pour down slopes and pool in the low places until a river forms that circles the world. This is not an accident. It is the deliberate act of Ahura Mazda and his council, a transformation that turns the strength of the earth itself into a refiner's tool.
The river of metal glows brighter than any sunrise, roaring with a sound like 1,000 forges. The Saoshian stands at its edge with the immortals, and the command is given. Every creature must pass through. Here the myth takes one of its most surprising turns. For the righteous, for those who have aligned themselves with Ashur, even imperfectly but sincerely, this ocean of liquid metal will feel like warm milk. That is the phrase most often used in the old explanations. They will walk into what looks like annihilation and find themselves bathed instead in comfort. The flame that would destroy them if they were made of lies passes over them without harm because they have built themselves out of truth. For the wicked, for those who clung to the lie, the same river is torment, not as arbitrary punishment, but as consequence.
The metal burns away everything in them that is not real. Their attachment to evil is peeled off like diseased skin. The texts disagree as to whether this process leaves anything of the irredeemably malicious, whether Angra Mainyu himself is utterly destroyed or simply rendered powerless forever. But they agree that after this refining, there will be no place left where the lie can find a foothold. Its currency will be worthless, its language will have no listeners. The world itself is altered by this passage of metal. Impurities are burned out of the soil, the bones of mountains are reshaped, the atmosphere is cleared of the subtle grime that ages things. Time, as it has been known, begins to thin. There is a final great judgment in which Ahura Mazda, with the Saoshian at his side, pronounces sentence on the destructive spirit and on any remaining allies. The exact metaphysics of what happens then is left vague for mortal minds. Some sages speak of Angra's complete dissolution, as if evil never had an independent reality, only a parasitic one that cannot survive once its host is cleansed. Others think in terms of confinement, an imprisonment so tight that for all practical purposes the universe has been rid of him. What matters in the narrative is that his ability to influence creation is finished. The war that began with two spirits making opposite choices ends with only one path remaining. Then comes the Frasha Kariti, the great renovation. The word itself carries the sense of making fresh again, not wiping away and replacing, but restoring to a state that is both original and improved. In this renewed world, there is no death. Bodies are no longer fragile. They do not rot. They do not hunger in the old way.
The sources say that people will still eat, but what they eat will not come from killing animals, and the act of eating will be more like taking part in joy than in a desperate maintenance of strength. Some describe heavenly feasts where the righteous share in a miraculous meal made from the fat of a mythic bull called Hadayosh and the juice of the sacred plant. A banquet supervised by the Saoshian himself that heals every lingering wound and removes any residue of old sorrow. Once this healing is complete, there is no further need for such measures. The world does not wound anymore. The geography of the renewed earth is also imagined with care. The mountains are lowered so that travel is easy. No one is cut off in remote valleys. The climate is mild everywhere. There are no deserts that crack lips and no swamps that choke lungs. The seas are tamed. Dangerous beasts are either transformed into harmless forms or lose their taste for blood. There is no predator and prey dynamic left because that dynamic was a symptom of the age of mixture. In the Frashograeti, every creature lives according to its ideal form. For human beings, this means living in honest community. There are no kings in the old sense because there is no need to guard against war or to levy taxes to pay for armies. Ahura Mazda's rule is immediate. The Amisha Spentas and the Azatas are still present, but their work is no longer defensive. They are gardeners rather than generals. Memory, however, is not erased. This is one of the most haunting aspects of the Zoroastrian vision. The righteous remember the ages of strife. They remember sickness and hunger and betrayal. They remember their own failings as well as their victories.
That memory is what makes their joy so intense, because they know what has been avoided forever. They can look at a clear river and recall a time when rivers ran black with waste. They can hear a child laugh without fear and remember nights when the cries of children cut the dark like knives. They can clasp the hand of someone who once harmed them and see that hand now steady and incapable of repeating the harm. Forgiveness in this setting is not a sentimental pardon. It is the recognition that the very structure of reality has changed so that the old patterns cannot recur.
In this perfected world, there is still activity. Souls do not sit in frozen bliss. There are works of craft and of mind. There is exploration, not of distant galaxies in a science fiction sense, but of the depths of the divine wisdom that underlies everything. To live forever in this mythology is not to float as a disembodied spirit. It is to live bodily, under a sky that can never again be darkened by malice. To walk through fields where Ashur's Almighty smiles in every blade of grass. To drink from streams where Horvath's wholeness shines in every drop. Worship continues, but it is no longer a matter of pleading for help or protection. It is pure gratitude and contemplation, a celebration of the completed victory of Ashur. For those who heard these teachings in more troubled centuries, in ruined fire temples or in small gatherings of exiles by foreign coasts, the vision of the Frashaketi was not an excuse to ignore present suffering. It was a frame. It told them that their pain did not disappear into a void. It would be answered. It also told them that their choices in the meantime mattered, that the way they treated their neighbors and animals and rivers contributed to the shape they themselves would bring into that final river of metal. If they built themselves out of the lie, that river would be torment. If they built themselves out of Ashur, it would be comfort. The end of the story gave weight to every step along the way. Seen from a great distance, the entire tale that began with twin spirits choosing opposite paths and a first shining man named Gayamard can be imagined as a single long breath that Ahura Mazda draws and releases. In the intake, he creates and allows the possibility of refusal. In the exhale, he cleanses and perfects what responds to his call. Between those two movements lie countless lives, empires, rituals, betrayals, acts of kindness, nights of despair, mornings of courage. The Zoroastrian promise is that none of it is wasted. Every good thought, every honest word, every protective deed becomes part of the final melody when the wise Lord speaks the last judgment and the world blooms into its final form.